I still remember the morning I first noticed something off. It wasn't the kind of thing that would make me immediately suspicious. A missing receipt here, a forgotten text there. But there was this little, almost imperceptible shift in the rhythm of our life. My husband, Jason, always had a way of making things sound like they were part of some elaborate surprise, and I'd built my trust on that. I thought I knew him, thought I could read him like a book. That morning, though, as I brewed my coffee and watched him fumble through our kitchen drawers for a pen, I felt it, this tiny flicker of unease. Something was about to tip, and my gut was whispering that it wasn't trivial. We had been married for 14 years, which in hindsight feels like an eternity of tiny compromises and unspoken agreements. Our house in the suburbs of Denver was modest but perfect for the life we had carefully constructed. 2 kids, a golden retriever that slobbered too much, and weekend barbecues that usually ended in arguments about something stupid, like whose turn it was to refill the propane tank. We had everything planned out, right down to our retirement fund, which Jason insisted we manage jointly. For transparency, he'd say. I never questioned it. I trusted him. I wish I hadn't. It started with the garage. He claimed it had been falling apart for years and that he wanted to surprise me with a remodel. New cabinets, a built-in workbench, a fresh epoxy floor. I fell for it immediately. Jason had a way of painting dreams with words that made me forget the practicalities of life. It's going to be all yours, he said, eyes glinting. The ultimate space for your projects. I pictured myself arranging my gardening tools, setting up a little crafting corner, maybe even a mini home office. I didn't know then that those words were a lie. The remodel began slowly, in the way these things always do when someone wants to mask what they're actually doing. Jason spent hours at the hardware store, measuring, picking out paint colors, seemingly coordinating with contractors. He would disappear for long stretches, claiming he needed to oversee deliveries, and I never questioned it. I was busy with the kids, busy with my own work, busy trusting him. But the first odd thing happened when he gave me the garage keypad code. I memorized it easily and used it one Saturday morning to peek at the progress. I remember the smell of fresh paint, the sawdust lingering in the air, and the sound of a hammer somewhere deeper in the structure. But what I saw didn't make sense. The layout was off. The workbench was on the opposite side from where he had promised, and a corner of the garage seemed unusually reinforced, almost like it was a secret room. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he had some genius plan I didn't understand. Weeks went by, and the remodel continued. I started noticing more inconsistencies. The receipts that didn't add up, contractors Jason claimed we didn't hire, suddenly appearing on our driveway. He was always charming when I asked questions, brushing off my concerns with laughter or a pat on my shoulder. You're overthinking, honey, he'd say. And I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe him, because the alternative was unthinkable. I loved him. I had built my life around him. I couldn't imagine that the man who made me feel safe and adored could be hiding something so grotesquely selfish. Then came the day the keypad code changed. I had gone to the garage to grab some paintbrushes for a project I'd promised the kids I'd help them with, and the code didn't work. I panicked at first, thinking maybe I'd misremembered the numbers, but then Jason appeared, smiling, holding the new code like a gift. Change the lock for safety, he said casually. That should have been my first real alarm, but I didn't think much of it. Instead, I copied down the new code and went inside, trying to shake the feeling that something was different. It was months later, after the remodel completed, that the tiny cracks I'd ignored turned into yawning chasms. One evening, Jason had gone out to grab a few things for the garage and didn't come back for hours. My curiosity, which I had suppressed for so long, finally overpowered my trust. I grabbed my phone, drove to the hardware store he'd said he'd been visiting, and tried to trace his route. That's when I saw it. A moving truck parked in front of a house I didn't recognize. And then I saw her, a woman I had never met, standing in the doorway, waving at him with a familiarity that made my stomach lurch. I froze in my car, my mind spinning. The house wasn't far from ours, a modest place with a small garden out front. My chest tightened as I watched Jason hand her what I assumed were keys. Something in that moment clicked. Everything he had told me about the garage, about the remodel, about the money he said he was saving for us, it all fell apart. The reinforced corner, the odd deliveries, the mysterious receipts, they weren't for me. They were for her. The realization hit like a punch to the gut, leaving me gasping for air, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't process it immediately. I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe she was just a friend. Maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. But the truth kept creeping in like poison. The dates lined up. The money transfers I had seen on our joint account, which I had never questioned, suddenly made sense. Jason had been siphoning our shared retirement fund bit by bit to buy her a house, our money, our future. And all the while, he had been looking me in the eye, smiling, telling me how much he loved me, how excited he was for my surprise garage remodel. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every betrayal crush down on me. The children were asleep, blissfully unaware, and I felt both grateful and resentful for their ignorance. How could someone you loved so completely plan your financial and emotional ruin in the name of selfish desire? I kept replaying every detail of the last year in my head, looking for signs, for anything I might have missed. And I realized with a sinking clarity that I hadn't missed anything. He had been meticulous, careful, deliberate. Every lie had been layered under a veneer of domestic normalcy. The next day, I tried to confront him. I remember standing in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I slid the new garage keypad across the counter. "Jason," I said, my voice tight, "I think you need to tell me what's going on." He looked at me, confusion etched on his face. Or maybe it was practiced, hard to tell now. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice smooth. I felt my chest tighten. "The remodel, the money, the house," I said, words catching in my throat. He laughed, that same easy laugh that once made me melt. But it was hollow this time. "You're imagining things, honey," he said. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he admitted the truth. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something in me knew that this was bigger than words. Over the next few days, I started piecing together the evidence. Emails, bank statements, strange contractor invoices, all pointing to the same horrifying conclusion. Jason had used our shared retirement fund to buy her a house. Every detail of the garage remodel was a cover. Every weekend trip to oversee the project was a lie. And she wasn't just someone he met once or twice. She was his plan, his escape, his betrayal. I felt a cocktail of emotions so strong and raw that I couldn't name them. Rage, disbelief, grief, shame, humiliation, all colliding in my chest until it felt like I might physically break. I confronted him again, this time with undeniable proof. His face didn't change. If anything, there was a subtle smirk, a cocky confidence that made my blood boil. "You can't prove anything beyond the accounts," he said, cool as ice. I wanted to throw something, scream, shatter every plate in the house. But instead, I walked away, knowing that staying calm was the only weapon I had left. That night, I sat in the garage, now fully remodeled, staring at the walls he had promised were for me. Every scratch, every beam, every inch of that space now felt like a monument to his lies. I couldn't even touch the tools without feeling sick. The kids were oblivious, still trusting their father, still laughing at his jokes. And I hated that I had to protect them from this truth, from the storm of betrayal that had ripped through our lives. I felt trapped, like a character in one of those movies where the protagonist slowly realizes their world isn't what it seemed. Only this wasn't fiction. This was my life. This was the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, the man I had trusted to secure our future. And he had traded it all for someone else, leaving me with nothing but a renovated garage and a heart full of questions I would never have answers to. I started documenting everything, every transaction, every text, every suspicious detail. I didn't know what I would do with it, only that I needed a record, a lifeline of truth in a sea of lies. I felt like I was drowning in memories of the man I thought I knew, the life I thought I had, and I didn't know how to surface. Every glance at him now was like looking at a stranger, a man who had somehow stolen our shared dreams and replaced them with his selfish desires. And that's when I noticed the smallest, strangest detail. The keypad code, which he had changed supposedly for safety, was the first clue. I had ignored it at the time, thought it was nothing. But now I understood. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. Control over the space, over the truth, over me. It was a key to a lie so big it had built a house, literally, for someone else. And as I sat there in the silence of my own disbelief, I realized the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just financial. It was emotional, psychological. Every bit of trust we had built together weaponized into a fortress for someone else. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't leave, not yet. Not with the kids, not with the mess of our lives. But I couldn't stay. Not as the woman who had been conned, whose love had been exploited, whose future had been stolen. I felt like I was living two lives at once. The one the world saw, calm and orderly, and the one that existed behind closed doors, chaotic and screaming. And in that duality, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. The garage was never for me. It had never been for me. It was always for her. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even when I forced myself to go through the motions of a normal day. I made breakfast for the kids, checked homework, packed lunches, and tried to act like nothing had changed.
But every time Jason walked past me, smiling as if nothing had happened, I felt bile rising in my throat. The audacity of him, carrying on like a happy husband, while the house we built our dreams on was being siphoned dry for another woman, it was unreal. I began replaying every interaction over the last year, every little lie, every excuse. I felt like a detective in my own life, sifting through breadcrumbs he hadn't realized I was collecting, putting together a picture of deception so detailed it made my head spin. The garage, the so-called remodel, became my obsession. I would sit there for hours after the kids were asleep, touching the walls, running my fingers along the freshly painted beams, imagining the truth beneath. Each tool, each nail, each cabinet, every piece of that space had been carefully curated to hide his betrayal. I started keeping a log, writing down dates, receipts, phone calls, anything that might prove how meticulous he had been in orchestrating this. The longer I looked, the more I realized how brilliant he had been at hiding it. It wasn't just about the money. It was the lies layered so thick that I had no reason to doubt him until the very last moment. I started paying more attention to his behavior outside the garage. Late nights, working on the project, became frequent, and I noticed the text he quickly hid when I entered the room. Phone calls he took outside, hushed voices, hurried excuses. Everything pointed to her. I felt paranoid, almost like I was going crazy, but the evidence was undeniable. I even started following him, discreetly, trying to catch him in the act. And I did. One Thursday evening, I saw him pull into the driveway of that small house he had bought for her. They laughed together, hugged, and for a moment my world froze. The life I thought I had, the life I had poured myself into, was a fabrication. I began having nightmares. In one, I was trapped in the garage, the walls closing in around me as Jason laughed from somewhere just beyond the reinforced corner, the money slipping through my fingers like sand. In another, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a bank statement showing our retirement fund drained, the kids asleep upstairs, completely unaware. The more I dreamt, the more awake I felt, if that makes any sense. My anxiety became constant, gnawing at me like some living creature inside my chest. I couldn't escape it, and every day Jason's casual charm made it worse. I started asking him more pointed questions, carefully phrased, never letting on that I knew the truth. Did the contractor finish everything on time, I would ask? Was the paint what you wanted? He would laugh and reassure me, and I hated myself for believing him. I hated myself for needing that reassurance, for wanting the fantasy of a happy marriage to be real, even when every sign screamed otherwise. I felt trapped between my love for him, my hatred of him, and the unbearable reality of betrayal. One night after the kids were asleep, I decided I couldn't wait anymore. I drove past the house, hiding behind a bush, watching the lights flick on inside. There she was, cooking dinner, laughing, completely oblivious to the life she had helped destroy. And Jason, my husband, my partner, the man I had trusted with everything, was there, smiling at her like I had never existed. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone, trying to take pictures, trying to get proof I could use. The mixture of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief was suffocating. I felt like I was being buried alive by someone I loved. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, moving through rooms that had once felt like home, now alien. Every corner of the living room, every pillow on the couch, every photo on the wall reminded me of the life I had been lied to about. I kept replaying conversations in my head. How he had insisted the garage was for me, how he had laughed off any concerns about money, how he had smiled and reassured me.
I realized then that his charm wasn't a shield for love. It was a weapon. Every kind word, every tender gesture, every seemingly thoughtful surprise had been part of the manipulation, designed to keep me blind until it was too late. I tried to talk to friends, subtly, to see if anyone else had noticed anything strange. Some shrugged, some offered platitudes about marriages and trust, and a few gave me that look, the one that says, "You probably just imagine things." I hated that. Hated the way the world expects you to internalize betrayal silently. I felt isolated, like I was walking through a fog of lies with no compass. And yet, I couldn't confront Jason without hard evidence. I had to be sure, had to catch him in a way that left no room for denial. Then came the break. One weekend, he left to check on a supplier, and I realized I had the house to myself. I spent hours in the garage, inspecting every inch of it, taking pictures, noting details. That reinforced corner I had always wondered about, it wasn't just a structural quirk. It was a hidden space, a compartment, perfectly suited to store documents, cash, or valuables. I began searching through the cabinets, lifting floorboards, and finally found it, a set of envelopes, neatly stacked, containing documents that revealed every transaction he had made, every dollar of our retirement fund diverted to her. I felt sick, the reality of it settling like concrete in my stomach. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I wanted to scream, to tear down the walls, to burn every inch of the garage and the memories it held. But I didn't. I sat there in the dim light, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal, realizing the full scope of what he had done. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had stolen our future, bit by bit, under the guise of domestic normalcy. The garage, the remodel, the promises, they were all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. And I had been too blind, too trusting, too willing to believe in the man I thought I knew. After that night, everything changed. I started keeping a record of my own: texts, emails, bank statements, everything that could prove what he had done. I didn't confront him immediately. I needed leverage, needed a way to reclaim some control over the life he had tried to dismantle. I watched him, noting every movement, every lie, every smile he gave that woman. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible, yet fully aware of every deception. My heart ached, my mind raced, and my body carried the tension like a permanent weight. I also had to figure out the kids. They didn't deserve this. I didn't want to ruin their world before I even knew how to handle mine. So I compartmentalized, pretended, smiled, played games, went to soccer practice, cooked meals. But inside, I was unraveling, caught between a hatred so pure it consumed me and a heartbreak so raw it left me hollow. Every glance at Jason made my stomach churn. Every casual mention of the garage or money felt like a dagger twisting deeper. One night, I caught a glimpse of her again, not at the house, but in our neighborhood. She was jogging past, headphones in, oblivious to me. And for the first time, I wanted her to know what she had done. I wanted her to understand that the man she loved had taken from another family, that the life she thought she was building with him was built on stolen trust. But I couldn't do it yet. I had to wait. I had to plan. I had to survive, and survive in a way that didn't destroy the kids in the process. And so I waited, silently, carefully, meticulously, piecing together the truth while maintaining the facade of a happy, ordinary life. Every day, the garage loomed over me, not as a place of creation, but as a monument to betrayal. Every time I walked past it, I felt the weight of the lies, the stolen money, the secret she now lived in. And every time Jason smiled at me, I felt a rage so profound I thought it might consume me entirely. I had started imagining conversations I would have with him when the time came, rehearsing words I might never say, and imagining the exact moment I would unveil the truth. I thought about the first time I would confront her, if it ever came to that, and the scenarios swirled in my head like a storm. But mostly, I thought about how I could protect my life, my kids, and what little dignity I had left. The betrayal was total, and I had to respond with equal precision, equal strategy, equal cunning. And yet, amidst all the planning, the evidence gathering, the surveillance, there was a part of me that still ached for the life we had promised each other. The memories of our early years, the first house we bought together, the nights spent laughing on the couch. I clung to them in secret, as if holding on to that love might somehow mitigate the horror of his betrayal. I realized then that the complexity of love and betrayal is never simple. It doesn't exist in black and white. You can hate someone with every fiber of your being and still ache for the ghost of the person they once were in your heart. And that's when I made my decision. I would take control. I would expose him, the lies, the money, the mistress, the entire deception. But I would do it on my terms. The garage had been the key, the literal key, the false promise, the compartment of truth. And now I held the evidence, the leverage, and the understanding that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let him continue to manipulate, to lie, to steal. The stakes were too high, and the cost of inaction was unbearable. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be emotional warfare, legal battles, confrontation after confrontation. I knew that some nights I would cry, and some mornings I would wake up wishing it had never happened. But I also knew that I couldn't stay passive. I had to reclaim my life, not just for me, but for the children who trusted both of us blindly, for the future we had worked so hard to build, for the dignity I refused to surrender. And so I waited, silently, carefully, meticulously, piecing together the truth while maintaining the facade of a happy, ordinary life. Every day the garage loomed over me, not as a place of creation, but as a monument to betrayal. Every time I walked past it, I felt the weight of the lies, the stolen money, the secret she now lived in. And every time Jason smiled at me, I felt a rage so profound I thought it might consume me entirely. I had started imagining conversations I would have with him when the time came, rehearsing words I might never say, and imagining the exact moment I would unveil the truth. I thought about the first time I would confront her, if it ever came to that, and the scenario swirled in my head like a storm. But mostly, I thought about how I could protect my life, my kids, and what little dignity I had left. The betrayal was total, and I had to respond with equal precision, equal strategy, equal cunning. And yet, amidst all the planning, the evidence gathering, the surveillance,
There was a part of me that still ached for the life we had promised each other. The memories of our early years, the first house we bought together, the nights spent laughing on the couch. I clung to them in secret, as if holding on to that love might somehow mitigate the horror of his betrayal. I realized then that the complexity of love and betrayal is never simple. It doesn't exist in black and white. You can hate someone with every fiber of your being and still ache for the ghost of the person they once were in your heart. And that's when I made my decision. I would take control. I would expose him, the lies, the money, the mistress, the entire deception. But I would do it on my terms. The garage had been the key, the literal key, the false promise, the compartment of truth. And now I held the evidence, the leverage, and the understanding that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let him continue to manipulate, to lie, to steal. The stakes were too high, and the cost of inaction was unbearable. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be emotional warfare, legal battles, confrontation after confrontation. I knew that some nights I would cry, and some mornings I would wake up wishing it had never happened. But I also knew that I couldn't stay passive. I had to reclaim my life, not just for me, but for the children who trusted both of us blindly, for the future we had worked so hard to build, for the dignity I refused to surrender. And so I waited, poised on the edge of revelation, a storm gathering quietly beneath the surface, preparing to strike. Jason had taken everything he could think of, and he believed he had hidden it perfectly. But I had discovered the truth, and now the game had changed. The garage wasn't just a garage anymore. It was the epicenter of his betrayal, the fault of his lies, and the arena in which our next chapter would unfold. And I was ready. The first step was patience, and I had learned that it could be a weapon as sharp as any scream or confrontation. I couldn't risk tipping him off too early, couldn't let Jason see even the smallest crack in my composure. He was a master manipulator, and the last thing I wanted was for him to bury the evidence or shift the story before I had control. So I wore a mask of normalcy. I laughed at his jokes, nodded when he spoke about work, poured him coffee in the morning, made sure the kids' lives felt untouched, all while my mind spun constantly, running every possible scenario. Every time I passed that garage, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, a monument to deception, every square inch screaming betrayal. I started documenting everything even more meticulously. Photos of the envelopes, screenshots of suspicious texts, copies of every bank transfer, invoices, receipts, everything he had ever touched in this scheme.
I learned more about the house he had bought for her, where it was, how much it cost, even the way the mortgage was structured to avoid detection. He had been methodical, leaving trails so subtle that they could have been overlooked by anyone but me. And yet, the more I dug, the more I realized how deliberate it had all been. Every innocent conversation, every wink, every smile at the dinner table, it had been calculated, a performance designed to make me blind, compliant, unsuspecting. One Friday evening, after the kids were asleep, I found myself staring at the garage door for hours, trying to decide where to begin. The reinforced corner had a hidden latch, cleverly disguised. Opening it revealed a tiny compartment, small, almost laughable in size, but perfectly suited for documents. That's where I had found the envelopes, neatly stacked, revealing the full scope of Jason's theft. Each envelope told a story of deception, statements from our joint account showing transfers to her, legal documents in his name, construction invoices for that small house. He had been building a life for her, literally on the foundation of our shared dreams. I felt my stomach turn, bile rising, tears threatening, but I forced myself to stay calm. Rage had to wait. Strategy came first. I started rehearsing conversations in my head, practicing exactly how I would confront him. I imagined standing in the kitchen, my hands trembling with evidence, and finally watching the mask slip off his face. I imagined him trying to lie, trying to charm, trying to gaslight me, and I imagined shutting him down with facts he couldn't deny. And yet, there was a part of me, small, quiet, that mourned the man he used to be, the one who had held my hand on our wedding day, who had whispered promises of love and fidelity, the man I had built a life around. That man was gone, buried under the weight of a betrayal so calculated it was almost cinematic in scope. Then came the day that broke me completely. I had followed him again, just on instinct, and saw him meet her in some public place, a cafe I had never been to, a boutique downtown.
They were laughing together, leaning close, sharing coffee and pastries as if they were untouchable, as if the life he had stolen from me didn't exist. I wanted to run across the street and scream, wanted to confront them, wanted to crumble in the middle of the street. But I stayed in the shadows, recording, documenting, feeling the sharp edge of my anger slice through me like a blade. That image, him with her, carefree, intimate, smiling, seared itself into my memory. It was a cruelty so blatant I couldn't comprehend it. Back at home, I started noticing small signs he couldn't control. A phone left on the counter, notifications I hadn't seen before, tiny slips of information. I pieced them together, slowly constructing a timeline, understanding how long he had been living this double life. Months, years even, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the truth was now mine. Every text, every payment, every lie was now tangible evidence. And yet holding it felt hollow. The rage and grief were constant, and I realized that some part of me feared what would happen if I finally let it out. I confronted him indirectly first. I asked casual questions about the garage remodel, about the contractors, about finances. He smiled, reassured me, laughed it off. Each answer he gave was another confirmation of how well he thought he had hidden everything. I began to see the sheer audacity of it, not just the theft, not just the affair, but the complete, utter confidence that I would never discover the truth. It wasn't arrogance, it was control, a manipulation so refined it had taken me months to unravel. And the thought of how long he had planned this, of how much foresight he had invested in it, made my blood run cold. Then came the first real confrontation. I didn't plan it to be dramatic, I just couldn't wait any longer. I sat him down in the living room, the kids safely upstairs, and I slid the first envelope across the table. His eyes flicked to it, then back to mine, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow of panic, but then his features smoothed, and he leaned back, calm, practiced. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice smooth, controlled. But I didn't need words. I had the evidence. I started pulling out everything I had gathered, bank statements, receipts, texts. I watched his face carefully, noting the micro-expressions, the twitch in his jaw, the subtle shifting of weight. He had expected many things, but the reality of exposure, that was not one of them. He tried to charm, tried to joke, tried to make me doubt myself. "You're reading too much into this," he said, laughing lightly, trying to make the room feel casual. I had prepared for this. I didn't flinch. I laid out every piece of evidence, every transfer, every invoice, every lie. And as I watched him realize he couldn't deny any of it, I felt a twisted satisfaction mixed with the deepest sorrow. I loved him once. I trusted him completely. And yet here he was, a stranger in the guise of a man I had married, exposed and stripped of all pretense. The argument escalated quickly. His calm demeanor broke. Voices rose. Accusations flew. He tried to turn it back on me, tried to claim paranoia, tried to suggest I had misread everything. But I had the garage, the keypad, the hidden compartment, the envelopes. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of his lies. And finally, after hours of shouting, after tears and trembling, he admitted everything. Not with remorse, not with guilt, but with that same cold confidence that had driven his betrayal from the beginning. "I wanted something different," he said simply. That phrase, so casual, so unapologetic, made me realize the full scope of what I had lost. Our shared life, our future, our trust. It wasn't just broken, it was obliterated. In the days that followed, I began planning my next moves with surgical precision. I needed legal advice, I needed to protect the kids, and I needed to reclaim whatever control I could. I consulted with an attorney who explained how the retirement fund transfers and house purchase could be contested. Every step of the way, I felt the gnawing tension of betrayal, the constant hum of rage and grief, but also a growing sense of empowerment. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt like I had a weapon, not just evidence, but strategy. I had the ability to fight back, to make him face the consequences of his actions. Even then, the emotional toll was immense. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, thinking about the life he had stolen from me. Every glance at the garage brought a wave of nausea. Every interaction with him felt like walking on a tightrope over a pit of anger and heartbreak. And yet I couldn't stop thinking about the children. They were the anchor keeping me sane, the reason I had to approach this carefully. I couldn't let my rage destroy their sense of stability. I had to navigate this betrayal with precision, or risk losing everything, not just materially, but emotionally. I started to see the duality of Jason's actions more clearly. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had weaponized the mundane, the ordinary, the everyday. The garage, the remodel, the weekend errands, the casual smiles. They were all tools in a meticulously planned life he wanted to hide from me.
And in that realization, I felt a strange mixture of horror and awe. The depth of his manipulation was staggering. I had loved a man who had been an illusion, a performance designed to cloak theft and infidelity. And yet, now I had the reality, the proof, and the clarity that allowed me to step out from under that shadow. every day was a battle, a negotiation with my own mind. The rage, the grief, the disbelief, it all mingled into something exhausting, all-consuming. I realized that confronting Jason was only the beginning. The real fight was internal, reclaiming my sense of reality, rebuilding trust in myself, and figuring out what life looked like when the person you loved most was also the person who betrayed you most deeply. The garage, once a symbol of love and domestic promise, had become the epicenter of my awakening, the starting point of a reckoning that would reshape every part of my life. And through it all, I held on to one truth. The betrayal might have been brilliant, but my clarity, my persistence, and my ability to see through the illusion gave me power. Jason had thought he was untouchable, that the life he had stolen could remain hidden. But I had found the key, literally, metaphorically, emotionally. And now, the next chapter wasn't just about revenge or confrontation. It was about reclaiming my life from the ruins of his deceit. The garage had given me the evidence gave me the courage, and the courage gave me a path forward, one step at a time. The moment I finally decided to take action, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping past, knowing that the leap was terrifying but necessary. I had all the evidence I needed: bank statements, receipts, texts, emails, even photographs of him with her at the house he bought using our retirement fund. And yet, confronting him, exposing him, wasn't just about proof. It was about reclaiming control over my life, over my future, over the family he had tried to fracture. I spent that night laying out every piece of evidence on the dining room table, checking and double-checking, making sure nothing could be disputed, nothing could be twisted. The next morning, I woke up before Jason and the kids, heart pounding. I could hear the faint sound of the shower running upstairs, the soft creak of the floorboards in the bedroom. I felt like a soldier preparing for battle. I poured myself a coffee, drank it slowly, and rehearsed what I was going to say. This wasn't about yelling or screaming, though part of me wanted to. This was about precision, about delivering the truth in a way that left no room for denial. And as I walked through the house, seeing the familiar corners of our life, the living room where the kids built forts, the kitchen where we had celebrated birthdays, the garage that had once been a promise, I felt a deep, bitter clarity. Jason had destroyed what I loved, but I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I called him into the dining room, where the envelopes and documents were laid out like a map of betrayal. I don't remember exactly what I said at first. I think my voice was shaking, but steady. "Jason, I need you to look at this," I said. He looked confused at first, then his face shifted through stages of disbelief again, and then finally something close to fear. I watched him carefully, noting every micro-expression, every flicker of panic that passed over his features. And when I finally laid it all out, the retirement fund, the house, the lies, the mistress, he tried to laugh it off. He tried to charm, to spin it, to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. But I had rehearsed, prepared, and nothing he said could touch the evidence in front of me. Hours passed in a blur of argument, tears, and barely contained rage. He kept insisting that I didn't understand, that I was misinterpreting things. But I calmly, methodically dismantled every lie, every excuse, every half-truth he tried to throw at me. And as I watched him squirm under the weight of undeniable proof, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The man I had loved was gone. What stood in front of me was a stranger, a manipulator, a thief. And yet, the mask he had worn for so long still flickered occasionally. Charming, familiar, seductive. That duality made everything more painful. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the betrayal of a life I had thought we shared, a future I had planned, and a love I had poured my heart into. After what felt like an eternity, Jason finally admitted it. Not with remorse, not with guilt, not with tears, just cold, matter-of-fact acceptance. "I wanted something different," he said, that simple phrase hanging in the air like a dagger. I felt my knees weaken, not just from shock, but from the overwhelming sense of finality. That sentence encapsulated everything: the years of lies,
the stolen money, the secret life, the emotional devastation. And in that moment, I understood that my life had changed irreversibly. There was no going back, no rewriting the past, no pretending this hadn't happened. The next weeks were a whirlwind of legal consultations, late-night phone calls, and strategy sessions. I met with an attorney who specialized in marital disputes, someone who understood the financial and emotional complexity of what Jason had done. We went through every bank statement, every email, every document I had painstakingly collected. I realized then that the retirement fund transfers weren't just theft. They were a calculated, premeditated act designed to shield him from accountability. And yet, with the evidence laid out, with strategy mapped, I felt a tiny spark of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could take some of the power back. At home, life continued in a strange, fragile balance. The kids remained blissfully unaware of the storm swirling around them. I smiled at them, helped with homework, made dinner, all while planning every move with meticulous care. Each glance at Jason was a mix of disgust, rage, and lingering heartbreak. I had loved this man once, deeply, irrevocably, and now I was forced to navigate a reality where that love had been weaponized against me. Every time he tried to make casual conversation, I felt the tension of suppressed fury. And yet, I knew I couldn't explode in front of the children. They were the anchors keeping me tethered to sanity, and I had to protect them from the full brunt of his betrayal. One evening, I decided to take a step that terrified me. I drove past the house he had bought for her. I stayed in my car, hidden, watching the lights flicker on inside. They were laughing together in the kitchen, a casual domestic scene that made my stomach twist. I took photographs, silently documenting every moment. I realized then that this betrayal wasn't just financial. It was deeply emotional, psychological, every bit as damaging as the theft of our retirement fund. And in that moment, the rage I had been suppressing boiled over. I felt a fierce, almost primal need to reclaim what he had stolen. Not just money, not just trust, but the dignity and life I had built around him. I started making plans for the confrontation that would finally end his ability to manipulate. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would present the evidence, and the order in which I would dismantle his lies.
I felt a strange sense of empowerment in the meticulous planning, as if for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I was finally in control. The garage, once a symbol of domestic happiness, had become my command center, the place where I mapped every move, plotted every step, and prepared to reclaim my life. The confrontation itself was intense. I laid out every piece of evidence, every transaction, every lie in front of him. I watched the color drain from his face, the way his posture shifted, the subtle tremor in his hands. He tried to deny, tried to gaslight, tried to charm, but I was ready. Every lie he attempted to spin was met with proof, and slowly, methodically, the fortress of deception he had built began to crumble. Hours passed, the tension in the room palpable, until finally, exhausted, defeated, he admitted it all. No excuses, no justifications, just a cold, simple acknowledgement of the betrayal. Afterward, there was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that filled the house. I felt the weight of everything, the years of trust, the stolen future, the emotional devastation pressing down on me. And yet, I also felt something I hadn't in months: clarity. I knew the path forward, knew the steps I needed to take to protect myself and the kids, to reclaim whatever control I could over our lives. I realized that while Jason had taken so much, he hadn't taken my ability to act, to fight back, to rebuild. That realization was small, fragile, but it was mine, and it felt like a lifeline. The next days were spent with lawyers, in financial consultations, and quietly preparing the children for the possibility of a new reality. I shielded them from the full horror of what Jason had done, crafting a narrative that was truthful but age-appropriate. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, but necessary. Every day I reminded myself that the betrayal, though immense, did not define me. My actions, my choices, my resilience, that was mine. That was what would shape the next chapter of our lives. And then came the most unexpected feeling: release. Sitting alone in the garage one night, the space that had been a monument to lies now quiet and empty, I felt a sense of ownership over my own life that I hadn't felt in months. The anger was still there, the heartbreak, the bitterness, but it was tempered by clarity, by strategy, by the knowledge that I had survived, that I had reclaimed the truth, and that I had power. The garage had been his tool, his cover, his weapon, but it had also become my battleground, my proving ground, my instrument of liberation.
I realized then that betrayal, no matter how deep, doesn't have to destroy you. It can break you, yes. It can scar you, yes. But it can also awaken a strength you didn't know existed. Jason had tried to hide, manipulate, steal, and control, but he underestimated the very thing he had always taken for granted, my ability to see, to plan, to fight, to endure. And as I looked around that garage, the evidence of his deception surrounding me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of clarity, of power, and of the unshakable certainty that I would survive this, and that he would not define the rest of my life. The final step was inevitable. I would move forward, take legal action, reclaim what was mine, protect the children, and dismantle every part of the life he had secretly built while pretending to love me. I would emerge from this stronger, wiser, and more vigilant. And as I closed the garage door for the last time, the faint click of the lock echoing through the empty space, I felt a rush of determination. Jason's betrayal had been monumental, almost cinematic in its scope, but it was also finite. The rest was mine to write, and this time I would be the author of my own life, unbroken, unbowed, and finally free.